for
just one more quick question.
Yeah.
Are you bugging out on Pirkei Avot on Saturday?
Yes, but yeah, no Avot.
I thought Rabbi Sisi was doing.
We were going to have Rabbi Sisi come in, but things keep piling up, and like this, that, and the other keep piling up. So right, so we'll pause on.
One more quick question. Yeah. Are you bugging out on Pirkei Avot?
Hold on. There we go. So that we'll pick up next time, though. Last time we noted that sleeping till noon and midday wine and insignificant conversation remove a person from the world. So whatever it is that you do on Shabbat, you're not supposed to sleep till noon and day drink, or at least not as a regular practice. The bracha for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kisanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. And this chapter 7 of Daniel changes things. It becomes something of a different of a different book from here on out. There's a few. It's transitional both in. It's the last chapter that's in Aramaic. After this, it switches to Hebrew. Chapter 8 will switch back to Hebrew. You know, that doesn't show up so much in the English because it's English. But know that this is one of the very rare biblical books that switches languages. Almost all of what we often call the Hebrew Bible is in fact in Hebrew, but chapters 1 or 2 through 7 of Daniel are in Aramaic. And it's a different sort of thing. We're sticking with dreams, meaning there have been a number of dream sequences in the book of Daniel, but in each case it's been Joseph-like. Daniel is the interpreter of the dream that somebody else has, that the king has. Here Daniel is the recipient of the dream, so there's a difference, and the dream itself will be significantly different from anything we've seen before in biblical literature, really. So keep an eye open on that. That's what we'll dive into. Also, actually, recently, I just in this last week, I thought of all of us because I was reading references to martyrdom in Jewish literature, and the book of Daniel. One of the things we read was sort of like one of the examples held up of martyrdom that Daniel's that his compatriots were willing to be thrown into the fire into the fiery furnace rather than forsake God. That sort of is one of the early instances of martyrdom, of being willing to martyr yourself for the sake of God, like sort of is one of the things that we read. Anyway, chapter 7. This is chapter 7 of the book of Daniel. We'll pick up right where we left off. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylonia, Daniel saw a dream and the visions in his head on his couch. So again, change in thing. Daniel's the one receiving the dream, not somebody else. Thus he wrote down the dream, the beginning of the words he said. Daniel spoke out and said, I was seeing in my vision by night, and look, 4 winds of the heavens were rippling the great sea, and 4 great beasts were coming out of the sea, each different from the others. So now, again, it's a dream. 4 is our key number here. We know before, from one of the dreams, there are 4 great kingdoms that were going to come up and dominate the world, meaning the sort of known world or the region, or like the Israelites' world, the Jews' world. And successively rise and fall until, well, we'll see. But note this, right? So Alter's notes here are useful. The four winds of the heavens. The phrase also indicates the four directions of the compass. It sets the scene in cosmic terms, right? Like sort of like that this is something taking place on a grand scale. The next one, four great beasts were coming out of the sea. So the ultimate background of this moment is the Canaanite cosmologic myth, meaning the Canaanite story of creation, which our author would have known only through intermediaries, whether cultic or literary, meaning wouldn't have like encountered it himself. He was too late for Canaanites. Canaanites were long off the scene by the time the book of Daniel is written. The original inhabitants of the land had like long since seemingly disappeared.
Rabbi?
Yep.
Was this before or after Ezekiel?
After. I mean, in the timeline of the book, it's before. In being written, it's after.
Okay. And in Ezekiel, there were four heads on the cubes, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you'll see, and this will also be wild like Ezekiel. So yeah, these are so he's definitely echoing those, though almost certainly this is the last thing written that makes it into the Bible. So anything that's in the Tanakh, when the question is like which came first, the answer is if it came before Daniel. And we can assume that the author is familiar with whatever it is, right? Certainly with Ezekiel, you'll see there's this is sort of it's somewhat similar to Ezekiel, though in significant ways different.
Rabbi?
Yep.
How do we know that this is the last one?
Well, in some sense, like we like, I mean, it can be argued, but we know it because this seems to be referencing Antiochus from the Hanukkah story, who lives in 162. Everything else is taking place and seems to be written earlier. The only way we know things like when something is written is if others have referred to it or seem to be aware of it, and also like sort of like the stages of language and what the author seems to know and not know, right? The biblical scholars will point out that in the Abraham stories, he said that when Abraham wanders into the promised land, the narrator of the Torah says the Canaanite was then in the land, which tells us that this is being written at a time when the Canaanites were no longer in the land. Like you would say, like, I would say that the Jews still lived on the Lower East Side, or New Jersey was still primarily tribal land, or like whatever your phrase would be. Like, sort of when you use a phrase like that, it tells you when the narrator is speaking, because it places things on timeline. For Daniel, that's what seems to be the case. Everyone else seems to be before, this seems to be later. That's one thing, based on what references they're making and what kind of language they're using. Meaning, just like you can read something from 19th century America and they're not writing in the 20th or 21st century, right? So like that. Sometimes they'll refer to things that earlier generations couldn't have known. If somebody hands you, if somebody hands you writings of George Washington and refers to Chevrolets, like, it's fake. So here, same thing. The level of language, the level of Aramaic, so indicates late date of composition. And almost again, like very specifically with this stuff, there's an assumption on that he seems, maybe even in this chapter, like referring to to the Greeks, which, you know, in the book of Samuel, they didn't know from Greeks. Or they were an insignificant faraway people. The Greeks aren't insignificant faraway people by this point in history. Anyway, so 4 great beasts, these are the 4 great empires. Like we know that from sort of like earlier chapters, right? And the 4 great beasts were coming out of the sea, each one different from the others. So Alter thinks that this is pulling on the, you know, like sea gods of Canaanite lore. The sea gods in Canaan, like Lotan or Leviathan or Yam. Leviathan, of course, will appear in the first chapters of Genesis. God created, like that sort of, which some assume is polemic, right? Like that the sea god of in pagan lore, in Canaanite lore, is a creation of God in Israelite lore, which is like, again, like what you guys think is a god is just the mere creation of the actual God, right? Like with the hierarchy is clear. They don't deny the fact that there are sea monsters. Obviously there are sea monsters, but they're not gods. Daniel's dream. 4 great beasts were coming out of the sea, each one different from the others. The first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. I was watching till its wings pulled apart, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand on its legs like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And look, a second beast resembling a bear, and one side of it was made to stand, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they were saying to it, arise, consume much flesh. After this, I was watching, and look, another like a leopard, and it had 4 birds' wings on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I was seeing among the visions of the night, and look, a 4th beast, fearsome and terrifying and exceedingly powerful. It had a great iron teeth. It was devouring and mangling, and the remains at its feet it trampled, and it was different from all the beasts before it. They had 10 horns. I was watching the horns, and look, another small horn came from them, and 3 of the previous horns were torn out before it. And look, eyes like a man's eyes were in this horn, and a mouth uttering overweening things. I was looking until the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne, tongues of flame, and its wheels burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and went out before him. Thousands upon thousands ministered to him. Myriad upon myriad stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I was looking. Then from the sound of the overweening words the horn was uttering, I looked till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and consigned to the burning fire. As to the remaining beasts, their dominion was taken over, and an extension of life given them for a time and season. I was seeing in the visions of the night, and look, with the clouds of the heavens, one like a human being was coming, and he reached the Ancient of Days, and they had him approach before him, and him was given dominion and honor and kingship, and all the people, nations, and tongues did serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. I, Daniel, my spirit was downcast within me, and the visions within my head panicked me. I approached one of those standing there and asked of him the truth of all of this, and he spoke to me and made known to me the meaning of things. These great beasts, which are 4 kings shall rise up from the earth, and the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and take possession of the kingdom forever and ever. Then I wanted the truth about the 4th king, the 4th beast that was different from all of them, exceedingly fearsome, its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, consuming and mangling and trampling and what remained with its feet. And concerning the 10 horns that were on his head, and another that came up, and 3 fell before it, and the horn had eyes and a mouth, and uttering overweening things, and his appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching. That horn did battle with the holy ones and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came and meted out justice for the holy ones of the Most High. And time came when the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. Thus did he say, the fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that shall be on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and shall consume all the earth, and shall harrow it and grind it to dust. And the 10 horns from that kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be different from those before him. And 3 kings he shall bring low, and he shall utter words against the Most High, and afflict the holy ones. And he shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given in his hand for a season, and a half season. And the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion, destroying and expunging to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of all kingdoms under the heavens shall be to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Its kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey it. This marks the end of the matter. I, Daniel, my thoughts sorely panicked me, and my countenance changed, and I kept the matter in my heart. All right. Different from everything we've seen before. Like suddenly, this has become wild, 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 right? Like,
Rabbi,
yeah,
this is the world's indoor record for reading continuously without an interruption.
correct. It is my record for that because it's sort of like there's no break. I'm gonna have to go back and like unpack that, but like it's sort of it's this rush of images. Loyal, sort of like readers of the Torah are used to dreams of like 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows and things like this. That's nothing. That's nothing compared to this. This is wild.
Rabbi,
Yes.
the other thing that's strange to me is all the other things, Joseph and Daniel previously, they interpreted other people's dreams.
Mhm.
But here he's telling his dream.
Correct. Right. Very different. Right. His own dream. And in all what we're used to, we have things like, the sun and the moon, representing like, Joseph or Jacob and Rachel, right, in Joseph's dream, right? They're sort of like representations of things. Here, there are representations of things, but there also seem to be like literal things. And who makes an appearance? And an actual appearance?
God.
God makes an appearance. Whoa. Like, this isn't not in a cloud, not no man may see me and live. But it seems like God makes an appearance, and God seems to have an appearance because God's hair is described. And given like a specific, though somewhat mysterious appellation, right? Atika Yamim, the Ancient of Days.
Rabbi?
Yep.
Before you unpack all of this, do the Christian theologians use this the way they use Isaiah to predict the coming of the dominion that will reign over all?
Yes. Christian Bible here, so I can look it up. But the short answer is yes. And in fact, they in it, Daniel is placed immediately after Ezekiel in a in traditional Christian Bibles, same books, like when we say Old Testament, right? It's the same books, but in a different order. So Daniel comes right after Ezekiel, and just before Hosea.
To prove the point.
Yeah. And what he and to the point when Alter translates in verse 13, one like a human being, His footnote is the translation reads, this translation avoids like the Son of Man, even though that's what's in the Aramaic, because of its strong and debatable tilt towards a messianic interpretation. If traditional Christian interpreters have understood this as a reference to Christ, some Jewish interpreters have seen it as a collective representation of the Jewish people, which is equally unlikely. That's Rashi's read, right? So Bible scholar Collins, after a thorough and scrupulous survey of all possible readings, plausibly concludes that the term refers to an angelic being, most likely Michael, descending onto the scene with the clouds. This would explain the force of like. This figure looks like a human being, but is more than that. Right, this. But yeah, the placement of it after Ezekiel sort of is telling, like the order of the books when the books are ordered in a Christian Old Testament, it's made to sort of like lead up to a messianic redemption, as if it's all like sort of predicting a Messiah. The order in a Tanakh doesn't have that bias. Has a different bias. All right, so Daniel has a dream. He has a dream himself, and then relates it himself, as opposed to everywhere else as a note, where it's sort of like this back and forth thing. We have these four beasts, right? Each one wild, sort of wild animals. Different. The bear sort of is more or less realistic. The other ones aren't, right? Like they're non. They're not things that occur in nature. They're wild combinations of creatures. Except the bear, which seems to be more or less on point. They're all beasts of prey. They're all strong and symbols of things larger than themselves, right? Like so you have things like so the lion, verse 4. The first was a lion with eagle's wing. Obviously, that's a symbol of royalty. With wings and human legs, and was given a human heart.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
The Jewish Study Bible note on this says, winged lion represents Babylon, the ravenous bear, the Medes, the winged leopard, the Persians, and the last beast, the Greeks.
Right. I'm gonna keep going from where you're reading from, like so that's good, because Alter doesn't like sort of like spell it out as clearly. I think that this is like the standard read of it.
I think Art Scroll has it different though.
Let me finish this, and then we'll get to Art Scroll. Right. So the winged lion represents the Babylonian kingdom, the ravenous bear, the Medes, the winged leopard, the Persians, and the last beast, the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. Like, so again, like the four successive empires that would come to dominate Babylon and the land of Israel. With the 10 horns representing the Seleucid successors of Alexander in the Near East, right? So Alexander's kingdom, easy to remember, in 333, conquers BCE, conquers the land of Israel. He doesn't survive all that much longer after that. Alexander dies pretty young, and the kingdom is divided 3 ways among 3 different generals. The Seleucid Empire is going to rule from Damascus, and he's going to talk about the 10 successors on the Seleucid throne. These are administering like the one part of Alexander's empire. The last beast is the most fearsome and chaotic. Reading from the Jewish Study Bible, and the last horn represents the Seleucid Antiochus Epiphanes IV, right? who we know from the story, who killed some of his rivals, right? Like, so the three horns, the separation of the three kingdoms, the small one, Alter thinks maybe like put small as like an insult on Antiochus, because obviously Antiochus is the bad guy. And it takes out the other ones, killing some of his rivals. The human transformation of the first beast may be an illusion. Back to chapter 4, the general cast of this source is also like Ezekiel chapter 1, some of the perceptive among us have already noted, with its composite creatures and symbolic weight. So that's sort of like a standard read of like each one representing these different kingdoms that come forward, and the last one, sort of like the mightiest that you have to battle, is the Greeks, who are living in the time of the author. Obviously, Daniel, the story is set back centuries and centuries beforehand, but seems to be being written in the time of Antiochus. Alan, help us out here.
So this says the lion represents the great power of the Babylonian Empire. The high-flying eagle's wings symbolize its arrogance. The bear represents the Persian Empire, powerful and corpulent, but not speedy. It lacked the eagle's wings and the regal power of the lion. The three ribs symbolize the three Persian kings, Cyrus, Ahasuerus, and Darius. I don't want to keep reading. I mean, it just goes on.
That actually, like that's not that. That may be the author, what's in the author's mind. That's not so different. Like, that's just sort of like picking apart like what's the what I'm not like super able to do, which is like what's the meaning of the lion, like, and
right.
the wing, things like that. Like, that's sort of like, oh, well, the lions are like they were sort of like known for their swiftness. The bear, known for his power, not for his, he's not flying around.
Okay.
And the heart, again, like presumably, I don't know, like there's, like I can't unpack the symbolism, but like being given a human heart, like has a certain thing. Tearing apart three ribs between teeth, like all of that, again, loaded. And they would have, and ancient readers would have known it. A giant, but it's all clearly seems to be, or everyone reads this as three great empires that will dominate with great strength, but not the level of strength of the fourth empire, which will be mighty on a different order from what anyone has seen before. And that's Alexander. But Alexander, since we read to the end, we know and this is part of the astrological nature of what's going on, that each empire was defeated by sort of a mightier beast, by a mightier empire. The last empire, for which we can't imagine anything human being more mighty than that, they will be taken down by none other than God, right? God ultimately is in charge of everything. So God ultimately is the one allowing the rise, and will see to the fall of them all. That ultimately God is stronger even than this strongest beast.
If this is a reference to Alexander and the splitting up of the kingdom and eventually leading, I guess, to the Maccabees, does this sort of date when this was written?
Yes, so that's a general assumption, is that it dates when it's written, and there are those who say that like date like within a couple of years, like meaning that it's after the rise of Antiochus and before the fall. So most think you can date this to like between like 162 and 164 BCE or something like, or like right around there. Whereas for some of these other books, like we're sort of like we have a couple of century gap here, like sort of like a couple of like many put it within a couple of years. That so yes. For verse 7, fearsome and terrifying, exceedingly powerful, altars note the most menacing of the beasts represents Greece, with the persecutions of the Jewish populations around 167 BCE, particularly in mind, according to the view of most scholars. Hence the iron teeth and the devouring and mangling and trampling. And then again, so early, it's the 10 horns, maybe the 10 successive kings. The small one, thinking that it's Antiochus the fourth, Babylon. The verse 8, 3 of the previous horns were torn out before it. These are the 3 claimants to the throne, eliminated and supplanted by Antiochus Epiphanes. And then verse 9, where things gets good, right? Because amidst all this chaos, right, like up until now, history is just a succession of mighty empires rising and falling and destroying each other and tearing things apart and ferocious beasts. Then the Ancient of Days took his seat. Author's note here, at this point, in contrast to the earlier dream visions, the scene becomes explicitly apocalyptic. God himself enters the picture, seated on a throne, clothed in glorious white raiment to mete out judgment. History is to take a decisive and irreversible turn through the spectacular divine intervention. The apocalyptic note aligns this chapter with the second half of Daniel, which is while it is being written in Aramaic for this chapter, all that follows will be in Hebrew from chapter 8, serves as a bridge between the first half of the book and the second. So again, all of human life is in chaos with overweening strength, these gigantic beasts. But in, literally as it were, walks God. With this sort of like these incredible image, right? The Ancient of Days, white garments, hair of his head like pure wool. This is the sort of standard images that we have from Michelangelo's ceiling, or at the Sistine Chapel, or the sort of like Gandalf-like image that most of us have for God, that I continuously inveigh against. It's of course rooted here. Here we have like God sitting on a throne in white garments, long white beard, etc. His throne, tongues of flame, its wheels burning fire. Right? Like this is this grand version of the throne that God is on. A river of fire flowing and went out before him. And whereas, so whatever throne these human kings are on, much greater than.
Rabbi,
What? Yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
Presumably this was written by scholars who were Mediterranean, North African, Middle Eastern. Why the European image of a white man and white hair?
Not a white man necessarily, just white hair.
Oh, okay. So we can't assume this was the
I would not make any
chapel image of the God as a European.
Correct. Yeah. So good to check out because I made those references like to the Sistine Chapel or to Gandalf. Like, but would the author have envisioned what we would think of as somebody with like white skin? Not necessarily. Most people, of course, will, I think, conjure images of the majority ethnicity in their society, or possibly of their family or their own ethnic group, whatever that might be. So it may be safe to assume, given that this is somebody of Judean extraction living in Babylonia, the image would look more like somebody native to that region. And again, so it could be, it may be Some people looks more what we would think of as Iraqi than anything else. So yeah, not necessarily white skin, white hair, white clothes, not necessarily white skin.
Rabbi, what's interesting is that it only references the hair and the clothes and all white as a symbol of purity. In other words, it's almost like an image. Well, I'm sorry, it is like an image, but there's no reference to the face, to the characteristics of the face. No one except Moses was able to look at God face to face.
Right. And right. The end of the Torah says that Moses knew God face to face, panim al panim. And then in Parashat Kitisa, 34 of the book of Exodus, God says, you can't look at my face. You can only see my back. So whatever that means, but right. It's not described, even though that's sort of like what we, the readers, are like, give me more description. Like, you give me description in insane detail of the curtains hanging in the Mishkan, but like you look at God and you don't give me that. So yes,
It's just age and purity.
right. Yes, age, purity, and again, impossible strength. Sitting on a throne of fire, in front of a river of fire. The Jewish Study Bible notes on this section: the chaos and destructive power of the beasts is followed by an even more awesome judgment scene. The model for the judgment scene is the ancient Near Eastern council of gods in heaven, often utilized in the Bible to depict God's council. So this, you'll see it in the Psalm for Tuesday. God sits in the council of the gods, and every so often God is seen at the end of, Parshat Mishpatim, chapter 22, 23, 24-ish of Exodus, like God is on a throne, and God is occasionally pictured in the Bible, more frequently in rabbinics. Also here, sort of as the head of a cabinet meeting. So God is seated on the throne, on the fiery throne here, and there's sort of like a council, not of advisors, but like of an entourage, a court that is sitting with him. And the image, which is how a human court would work. But again, here, the human court, you got a handful of advisors, a dozen, 2 dozen advisors. Here, God is attended by thousands and thousands and thousands. God seems to be this massive being, and there are thousands and thousands attending to him. So like so that's this scene. You think Alexander, or successor to Alexander, you're mighty because you have a big kingdom. The cabinet here is thousands. You human don't hold a candle to the real power. Verse 9, the Jewish Study Bible, again, Ancient of Days is sort of like, for me at least, a wonderfully poetic phrase. God is described in corporeal terms, in the way that that El is pictured in Canaanite myth, with the warrior god Baal coming before him and slaying the sea monster. It's significant, however, that combat is not mentioned here in Daniel, only judgment. As in Genesis 1, God has absolute sovereignty over the world and does not need to establish authority through conflict. So their view is that this is pulling on mythological ideas of God, sort of like with other small g gods, as it were, with him. But whereas in pagan myths, God wins by battling the other gods, and like the head god then comes out on top, Zeus, whatever it might be. Here, that's not present. God is the creator of everything else, doesn't need to fight them for a position, just has it. We'll keep going. So God's in charge. Court is seated and the books were opened, right? Like there's a sort of image of God getting ready to judge. Daniel's looking, this is verse 11. And the horn, this speaking horn with eyes, it says, his translation is overweening words. In JPS, it's arrogant words. I looked on, then because of the arrogant words that the horn spoke, the beast was killed. As I looked on, its body was destroyed and it was consigned to the flames, right? So this crazy creature from the special effects department with the 10 horns and the extra horn that takes out the 3 other extra horns, and the horn has eyes and a mouth and is speaking. Again, alter overweening things, or JPS, arrogant things. God, like, just sort of is able to, flick it away. God effortlessly destroys the fearsome creature and puts it into the flames. That's Antiochus, right? That's the beast that seems to be so much more powerful than the other beasts. The Ancient of Days can consign to the ash heap of history, literally, with ease. The dominion of the other beasts was taken away, but an extension of life was given to them for a time and a season, right? So like, the other ones, less arrogant, we'll let them play out the string. They're mathematically eliminated from contention, but like we'll let them sort of play it out. Then this next thing, verse 13, as I looked on in the night vision, one like a human being came with the clouds of the heavens. He reached the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. All nations and people of every language must serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion that shall not pass away. So one like a human being, literally Ben Adam, son of man. The JPS comment, which in the Bible is idiomatic for a human being. Here, however, the celestial being is like a human being, i.e. is human countenance. So the author is arguing either that the predictions have all been fulfilled in the past, or that Daniel's predictions did not include the end of time. So this can either be one of God's angels, or some read it as a messianic vision. Either way, Jewish or Christian can be read messianically, like whichever. But obviously, right, the everlasting dominion is something from God, right? His dominion is everlasting dominion. In verse 14, I'll just comment, this is an apocalyptic motif par excellence. History as we know it, with its cycle of empires, comes to an end, and the divinely affected kingdom, championing God's people, is instated instead. Again, the end of 14. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. That's the key thing, right? That's the apocalyptic part of it. All of history, one empire after another, this fearsome beast, that fearsome beast, this one defeats that one. All of that will come to an end. And there will be, from at God's direction, an everlasting kingdom never to be destroyed. That's the key thing that's happened here. Is it natural? Is it not natural? Is it supernatural? What does it look like? That's not said. The key thing is that it is, or that it's coming, and that all peoples and nations will serve.
Rabbi?
Yep.
So when you say the 4 sentences before that you just said about no more kingdoms, conquering other kingdoms, etc., and then that's the ultimate dominion. Is that the is that the definition of the Messianic era?
It is a definition.
Okay.
It is not the only one that one can have, as it were, or that's out there. But it's one, and it is one of the earliest. Again, like this is the flavor obviously is different from earlier things. Like before, like the earlier parts of the Tanakh seem to envision an independent kingdom of Israel, where the people serve God at peace. This is much broader and much more global and more obviously supernatural and things like this. Like the
Rabbi?
Yeah.
In a Jewish Study Bible note on that, it says, later in Jewish tradition, the messianic interpretations faded, and the one like a human being was seen as representing Israel. And
Right.
that's Ibn Ezra and Rashi.
Right. Right. So so that's when I say like it's one of the visions. This can be read as that or as not that. So obviously it could be you don't need that much imagination to imagine that the one who's standing for God, who will end history, and that all the world will or should serve, could that people have had a Christological read of that. People have had a messianic read of that. People can have this notes a view of that. Well, that represents the people of Israel. That Israel will stand before God and will be standing at the end of history. Or as mentioned in the commentary, it could literally mean an angel. That this doesn't mean any human kingdom, but rather just that God will be the one sort of in charge at the end.
So another question, Rabbi, is there then a generally accepted ancient / modern, who knows, interpretation of what the Messianic era is going to look like?
No.
Or is it depending? In other words, there are many Jewish views on what the Messianic era would look like.
Yes.
Okay.
As is the case for a number of things, there are many different ones. Every so often, people, I may occasionally be among those people, who say like the Jewish view is blah 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 blah. Those people, even if they're me, aren't telling the truth, which is or are using the phrase generally, right? Like, so the Jewish view of the afterlife. There is no the Jewish view of the afterlife. Believe me. The Talmud back here has many views of the afterlife, or the Messianic times, right? Whatever it might be, like all the stuff, like there might be, there are things that there are more consensus on. There's, there might be the Jewish view on the consumption of bacon, traditionally, right? Like, but past a few things like that, for all of this sort of like the sort of like hard to know things, there are tons and tons and tons of different versions. What's significant here is, in part, that the idea is really being introduced in earnest and given a strong hechsher that you're going that there is a time when the cycles of history will end. What that's going to look like, we can then argue about, because obviously it's a dream. But this is, and especially because we're nearing the end, like the sense of that history has gone out of control, and that God needs to step in and sort of take control of it, almost the way God did before. The Israelites were enslaved, God stepped in and bailed them out. Now we're again in servitude to the great powers. God needs to step in and end this. And before, we were redeemed, and it was incomplete. We were completely brought out to the promised land eventually, but these other empires were left standing, even if the one was brought low. We need a decisive redemption, one that will finally end it all. So, first one, Egypt. Second, partial. Second one, Babylon. We were brought out of that exile as well, but it was partial. Now, the third and final one needs to come. The third one will complete the cycle. The third one will be the big one. It will be decisive. That seems to be what's going on. Now, of course, what's going to happen is they will be redeemed, but it'll be partial again. It'll be the Hanukkah story. They'll defeat the Greeks, but won't be able to keep it together. And Rome will rise in the shadow of Greece and prompt the need for the final and great redemption, right? So you see again, like if this is being written in the 160s BCE, you see like the ground being being prepared, both for the eventual advent of Christianity and for the advent of Jewish messianism. I mean, both were started as Jewish messianism, but you see it being prepared. It's not clear from Samuel, and Kings and stuff like that stuff is coming, but you do see it now that's like why that stuff was will have root in the Jewish tradition, because Daniel is good fertilizer for that.
So what you're saying is that there's a continuous series of redemptions, none of which heretofore have really been it.
Right. And what will become normative Judaism, and to a certain extent, to my knowledge, normative Christianity, is that the next one will be it. And that is why there's great suffering, like under these great beasts trampling everything in their past, before the Ancient of Days is moved to act. And that will be, of course, a theme throughout, right? Like that whenever there's a mighty evil monster trampling us, like in this dream, then the call comes that this must be it, that God has to now come and act and save us. Like that's this is the start of that pattern. Look at verse 22 until like the horn that eyes and the mouth uttering overweening, or as JPS would say, arrogant things. I guess I'm looking at 20. And his appearance was greater than his fellows. That's Antiochus. I was watching the horn did battle with the holy ones and prevailed over them, right? He defeats the Jews until the Ancient of Days came and meted out justice for the holy ones of the Most High, right? God's going to come in and defeat those who we can't defeat. And the time came when the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. Thus did he say, the fourth beast of the fourth kingdom that shall be on the earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and shall consume the earth and harrow it and grind it to death. Where like sort of like this is like, so the Greeks for him, or like later they would say the Romans, or you can again, it'll be the whoever it might be, the Nazis, Soviets, you name it. Et cetera, right? Like the eventually be different from those before him. Three kings shall bring low until 25. Shall utter words against the Most High and afflict the Holy Ones. Shall think to change the times and the law. Shall be given his hand for a season, and a half season. A court shall be seated, etc. And then there'll be his dominion will be taken away, be expunged. So the authors comment on verse 25 that the monster shall think to change the times and the law. This Sibylline formulation in all likelihood refers to the decree of Antiochus Epiphanes suppressing the traditional Jewish cult, the traditional Jewish servants in the temple, and imposing pagan worships in the Jerusalem temple, right? Like the subverting the law is of course like that unique, the Antiochus move of banning circumcision and Torah and proper temple worship, and that will exist for a time, and then God will judge, and dominion will be taken away from the ones who do that, and God will install an everlasting kingdom that all will serve. And that's the revelation to Daniel. So it is so that's the big thing that goes on. Totally different from everything before. This is called an apocalypse, right? Like that's mean that there'll be some sort of end times that change everything. And it's not just another battle like in Judges where like and the land is quiet for 40 years and then another thing happened, right? Or David's battles. He fought this battle, he fought that battle, he fought this battle, he fought that battle. This is everything gets greater and greater and greater and greater until the power is greater than anything you could ever imagine. And when all seems to be lost and you're suffering, God's going to come in and save the day. The Ancient of Days will come in and calmly change everything. This is why Daniel's Daniel, meaning a different flavor of biblical book from everything else. All right. Tonight we won't have class. I have to attend to other things. Tomorrow night davening's at 7 o'clock and Saturday mornings at 9:30, and we'll pause Pirkei Avot for this week. Next week I don't think I'll be able to make it to class on Thursday, so assume that unless you hear otherwise, assume next week is off. And other than that,
Drinking is okay until Friday night for you, Rabbi.
yeah. We'll wait for after. I'm supposed to.
There's no class tonight?
No
Correct.
question.